Hello everybody and welcome to Some Patches Required, a show where we hope to educate and entertain you on the ever-turbulent games industry. As always, I am one of your hosts, Aaron.
And I'm your other host, Zach.
And before we jump into today's main topic, in the spirit of, I guess, not efficiency, but actual productivity and hopefully self-improvement, thank you so much to all of the returning listeners. If you've been with us for just a handful of episodes or straight from the beginning, sticking with us has meant a huge amount. And if it's your first time listening, thank you for dropping on and giving us a chance. Please do not take the fact that I said dropping on as any sort of indication of the overall quality of the show. But if all of you collectively would not mind too terribly sharing the show, liking, subscribing on the relevant platforms, any of our social medias, that's really our only way to grow, and it is tremendously appreciated every single time you do it. So thank you again. And now that I have kind of blasted through the homework, it's time to talk about Apple.
As in the fruit.
Yes,
Apple
exclusively the fruit. What's your favorite apple?
Well, I like Granny Smith apples.
How do you feel about a Fuji?
They're okay.
Are there any apples that you feel have wronged you?
No, not particularly. And I'll be honest. I don't even know if the actual apple that we're talking about today has wronged me. And of course, we're talking about the tech giant Apple, which, funnily enough, has two very large campuses in Austin, Texas. So that's fun. They're always watching, always watching.
It's nice that finally a big company gave a little city like Austin a chance.
It's true. Just like Tesla gave us a chance.
Tesla, yeah, that one.
Facebook,
Facebook,
or I guess Meta, Gaggle or Google rather.
Google, okay.
Yeah, no, there's a list of them for sure. Also, I just want to say, when you said "in the spirit of," for some reason I wanted to blurt in Agamemnon. I don't know why that came into my brain, but that was what I wanted to blurt out in that magical moment.
Well, considering how relevant it was, I do wish you'd said it so we could have included it in the show.
Yeah. Well, of course, Agamemnon, the CEO of Apple, has been doing battle against many a foe in the recent years. But on a serious note,
Apple CEO's name really was Agamemnon.
That would be pretty impressive. I feel like Agamemnon is a very powerful name.
I feel like it is.
It's
going to happen. There's going to be a tech bro CEO named Agamemnon before my timely demise. I'm predicting timely demise.
So also, so first I'll just say this. So we're talking about Apple and specifically their legal cases against both Epic Games and also the Department of Justice in the United States of fucking America. As I put an accent on that's definitely not American. But I'm just clarifying that so everybody knows what this episode's supposed to be about, so I can then side tangent to something real quick, which is, I just want to say, the Fallout TV show, from what I've seen, is like 500 times better than what I expected. I expected hot garbo trash. And it's actually very watchable. So, I just have to say that we can end it right there. This will forever date this episode, but just had to put it out there that it's not a flaming dumpster fire of dog shit. So,
This is good news. I have yet to indulge in the product, but if it does turn out to be as good as everyone's kind of saying it is, then at least we still have the Borderlands movie to look forward to.
On a different note, Apple versus so going back to 2020, This all started because Epic decided to give a 20% discount for users in order to navigate the App Store's 30% fee. The 20% discount was on V-Bucks for Fortnite. You may know the game. If you don't, I don't know where you've been for a long time, but it basically kicked off this very intentional legal battle between Epic and Apple and also Google, where Epic is claiming that the App Store and the Android Play Store are basically monopolies, limiting a lot of the control around like payment processing and distribution of apps that developers make on mobile devices. So that's where all of this has really started. And ultimately, Apple's had quite a few wins. They've been found not to be a monopoly in the specific weird market that the court defined, which is the digital mobile gaming transactions market, whatever the heck that means. I actually disagree with that ruling. But the one strike against them was with payment steering, which was found to be out of compliance with certain California market acts that are supposed to protect companies, competition, and consumers. So where we're at today, is that a lot of courts, including the Supreme Court, have basically validated that is anti-consumer and Apple cannot conduct payment steering. So Aaron and I actually learned recently that Apple's still trying to do that with a 27% fee for companies that want to link to an external payment method. We'll get into that later. But ultimately, it's been this big back and forth because Epic wants to bring the Epic Games Store, which I have my own strong opinions on, to mobile devices to compete with both the Android Play Store and the Apple App Store. Apple contends that it is trying to protect users and its ecosystem by limiting who can get on the platform. And, there's big legal battle there. I think the interesting thing is the most recent news is actually in the EU and not in the United States. And it's specifically around the fact that the Digital Markets Act, which is an EU regulation that aims to make digital economy fairer and more contestable. I stole that from Wikipedia, by the way, if you couldn't tell. Basically, that act had to get implemented early April. And so there was this big battle between Epic and Apple yet again, where Apple deactivated Epic Sweden's Sweden developer account that Epic was planning to develop the new mobile Epic Games Store on. And that's all been, taken back. Apple's reinstated the developer account for Epic. Epic plans on continuing to develop for this, additional app store for mobile devices. But that's kind of where we're at right now, is it's basically a battle where Epic is saying Apple is a monopoly, it's being anti-consumer, it's being anti-developer, and Apple is claiming that this walled garden that it has is ultimately there to protect users from malicious software and predatory, software developers, ultimately. So that's kind of where it's at right now. I think probably the most interesting thing from the case, Aaron, is my conflicting opinions of Tim Sweeney.
Yeah, he's playing an interesting character here.
Well, it's the fact that he constantly he wants to come off as this very, prosumer or pro-consumer. I made up prosumer. That's not a word. But
it's a fun portmanteau.
Yeah. He wants to come off as this, hero all the time. I've posted some of his tweets in our document, and I feel bad because, I like to think that if I was in a position like him, I would like to uphold my general values that I have now. But I just have a really hard time taking him seriously with all of these it's a virtue signal regardless, whether it's a good or bad one, maybe you can have a debate over that. But I just don't know if he actually gives a shit or if he's just trying to make more money.
Yeah, I think we're actually going to see stuff like this pop up throughout the rest of this story. But there's a lot of playing to public favor here, and he is kind of playing up that David and Goliath-esque angle because Apple is this huge company. But, Tim Sweeney ain't Robin Hood. There's a fundamental difference there. So yeah, no, I mean, it's definitely interesting to see that sort of I'm not even sure what it's not pity baiting. It's almost like outrage baiting to some degree. That largely mobilizes consumers in favor of one company. It's a fairly clever tactic, all things considered.
Well, the one thing that they caught a lot of heat for was their hashtag Free Fortnite campaign, which, if you remember that black and white weird like dystopian video that they made where like the girl comes in and smashes a TV with a massive apple on it, and then it all all the color comes back.
Wasn't it like super 1984?
Yeah, 1984. It was very 1984. And it was part of the PR campaign against Apple as a result of Fortnite being removed from the App Store because of all of this.
In fairness, I think that in itself was a play on an old Apple, like a super famous old Apple commercial that was very 1984 inspired. So they've done their homework to make snarky ads.
Oh, no, I think for sure that Epic is a bit of a snarky company in general, just based on the way that everything's gone. I mean, when their Sweden developer account was ultimately shut down, basically Epic posted all of the email back and forth between them and Apple around, basically Apple was saying, hey, how can we trust that you're not going to violate our terms of service for the App Store? And Tim Sweeney responded saying that they would honor everything. They wouldn't break any of the rules. And then Apple basically came back saying, well, on Twitter, you're shit posting on all of our policies and you have a history of breaking the rules. So how can we trust you? We're going to deactivate your account. And basically Epic just posted all of this on a blog post. I guess I would think those emails were probably supposed to be confidential. And I just think it's funny that Epic, isn't even concerned about posting those or any of the implications in terms of what that does for them.
Their PR team obviously knows how the internet communicates. Whereas, Apple's legal team has to play it by the books. So Epic is running this kind of gonzo underground campaign to try and mobilize consumers. And yeah, I don't know. It's certainly fascinating, and Tim Sweeney is just a character. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly how to take that, because I also have my own opinions on the whole Epic Store thing in general.
Yeah. Well, we've talked about that a little bit on the show. I took issue with the fact that, he was basically trying to argue that the Epic Store and them buying games, like buying exclusivity, just throwing money at games to not show up on Steam. He was arguing that was a pro-consumer and developer move because it was going to push Steam to lower their platform fees. And what rubbed me the wrong way is that I think the Epic Games Store largely is still not at parity with Steam. And I think that the way that they should win is by developing a better platform, not by buying exclusivity. So I just don't trust Tim Sweeney when he tries to argue that he's kind of like this man of the people. I mean, I ultimately think that Tim Sweeney and the change that he enacts here, if, he ends up getting all the wins that Epic wants, I think that leads to a better world in general. I won't argue there, but I don't think he's doing it out of like this love for the developer or the consumer, like he's trying to play it off as. And like I said, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he's a really chill dude, but it's very hard to not see the very obvious financial benefit that Epic has if they can get alternative platforms onto mobile devices. Especially because I can't remember which article it was. I was trying to find the note in here, but I'm pretty sure that the majority of online transactions, let me rephrase that. The majority of App Store transactions are in games. So if he strips that out of like either of those app stores and brings a lot of that over to the Epic Games Store, like they could lose a ton of money. And by they, I mean Google and Apple.
Oh yeah. Like a catastrophic amount of money potentially.
Yep. So obviously Apple has a very big interest in maintaining their App Store dominance and not allowing other platforms onto iPhone because it's just a massive portion of their business. I think I saw an article that said $1 trillion were generated by the App Store. I believe it was in 2022 is the year that was stated. I mean, just a massive amount of money. I saw another article that said that Apple pocketed $22 billion from the App Store in 2022. We have a lot of data from 2022, I guess. But yeah, it's, you know, just ridiculous sums of money, massive money generator for Apple. And so I think that's probably a good transition point to a court case that could potentially impact them even more, because the Apple versus Epic situation, I feel like that is a little bit smaller in scope than what the DOJ is suing Apple for. I know you dug into that specific case a little bit more deeply, but that's a larger situation than I feel like just the App Store. I feel like that even goes to like in the individual app level and some of the functionality on phones themselves.
It does. The Department of Justice suit against Apple is, I want to say the fourth. No, this is the third, maybe. Beans. I did have this actually written down, and now I'm going to feel like a real fool. It is the third suit against Apple by the DOJ, but it is the most expansive by far. So this case, boiling it down, in March of this year, the DOJ filed an 88-page lawsuit against Apple, alleging monopolistic tendencies or attempted monopolization of basically the entire smartphone market. That is in collaboration with 16 states and filed in the state of New Jersey, which I promise is somewhat relevant a little bit later on. The easiest way to break it down without reading out too much legalese is that the lawyers targeted largely 5 main practices that illustrate Apple's basically monopolistic tendencies. The crux of the case is that the products themselves and the ecosystems are all designed in such a way that they lock you into that ecosystem, where then prices go up and innovation is muted, and accessibility to certain features is gatekept to others. Think the issues that you've had with messaging apps using iMessage between an Android and an iPhone, that kind of thing. So these main 5 points are the blocking of innovative super apps, in quotations, like what everybody's favorite billionaire toddler Elon Musk thinks X, nay Twitter, should be, which is basically an app that does it all. It's got your messaging taken care of, it's got your social media taken care of, it's got your shopping taken care of. Apple won't allow even proven examples like that, like WeChat, which is enormous.
That's really
in China.
big in China. Yeah.
Yeah. They won't allow that sort of thing to have a foothold on their platform in America. And then the idea of suppressing cloud streaming services to allow access to content not basically especially curated by Apple. Then the cross-platform messaging app gets its own special bullet point. So changes, which are now actually going to happen independently of the lawsuit. There are going to be changes to the way that iMessage integrates rich text messaging or rich messaging systems, I believe, in order to give a slightly more equitable solution to people who don't have iPhones to still unlock some of the features of iMessage. So that may end up weakening the case, but that's one of the main points. And then we've got diminishing the functionality of non-Apple smartwatches. That's a fairly straightforward one. And then limiting third-party digital wallets, which kind of ties into our Epic situation. So what they've done here is essentially, rather than focus on a specific niche market that no one has ever heard of, because I'm guessing the term mobile transactional whatever the heck was kind of just ginned up for that case. This is in the words of Anshul Sag from Forbes, the company's being sued for the way it runs its smartphone business. Essentially, it's being sued for the entire all-encompassing vision that Apple has curated since it came out, essentially, because now they have enough evidence to theoretically prove that it is antitrust. You know, it is anti-consumer. It is monopolistic in its tendencies. So that is the boiling down of it. The case itself is still very young. It's only been, out in the open for a month, give or take. So we'll be still talking about this for years. And there's no court date set or anything, but this could be a legitimate game changer on the level of, breaking up AT&T or Microsoft, if it should go through.
Yeah, I think ultimately these two cases are kind of pointing to the same issue, which is this idea of Apple having this walled garden, and to a lesser degree Google having this walled garden where there's really the only person that can let you in is Apple. Yeah. And the person with all of the power is Apple. If you want to be on an iPhone, you have to play by Apple's rules. You have to pay Apple's fees. You don't have any option outside of that. And as I said when I was talking about the Apple versus Epic, and even with the DOJ, they'll say the same thing there, is they'll say that this is a effort on their behalf to protect users from malicious websites, actors, all of that. They'll try to scare people into thinking that they're protecting you from all of these developers that are wanting to take advantage of you, to, steal your data, steal your money, I don't know, show your kids porn, whatever, right? Yeah. And to a degree, I think that they do provide some value by filtering out the garbage, right? But at the same time, are they gatekeeping too much? And I think what Epic and the DOJ are pointing at is the answer is yes, right? Yeah, they're not just protecting, they're not just protecting consumers, they're also protecting themselves in an anti-competitive way.
Yeah, I think that's kind of a fair statement, right? So, I mean, it's very gated community, as we've discussed. There certainly are benefits to Apple's ecosystem being so tightly run. When everything is an OEM product, you don't have to worry that much about variations in quality. Yeah. Supposing the OEM product has the reputation for quality that Apple devices generally do. The same does technically apply to software and user experience. The problem is that model does not work when everything is everywhere. and Apple wants to funnel it all through their very specific filters, and that just is no longer tenable, I don't think. And candidly, the main takeaway from the fact that this is all happening is, well, I mean, I suppose we can. Do you want me to gatekeep the big takeaway that I've got, or do?
Well, I mean, I think at this point, whatever you think makes sense to bring up, bring it up.
Yeah. So with the Apple versus Epic, I suppose one of my major takeaways there is that it is finally becoming apparent that enough companies have realized that there is money on the table that they want a cut of, that now the change will finally start happening. Maybe these practices have not been good for quite a while.
Yeah.
But the fact that other companies with enough money and political clout can now actually fight in the streets over who gets more money means that we'll start seeing the ramifications of it.
Well, so to that point, kind of an interesting thing that I didn't realize is Epic is not the only company fighting this battle. I'm trying to find the list of them, but Spotify, I know for a fact, is one of the companies that's been critical of Apple's, monopolistic tendencies when it comes to, app distribution and payment. I mean, that's actually a great example for another reason, because obviously Apple also has Apple Music. If Apple wanted to, they could tell Spotify that Spotify, for whatever reason, goes against their community guidelines, arguing maybe that, their promotion of Joe Rogan is against, I'm just spitballing.
Yeah.
Their promotion of Joe Rogan is against viewer interests or is spreading false narratives, whatever, right? And then they could shut down Spotify. And then Apple Music is the biggest platform available to iPhone users. You don't have Spotify anymore. That gets rid of their biggest market competitor because they technically have the power to do that. And there's no alternative method of getting Spotify on your phone. I think the interesting juxtaposition between iOS and Android that I should mention, because I actually didn't know this, I've never had an Android, is that with Android actually does allow third-party apps or app stores
for sure.
on your device. And it allows you to do side loading, which is basically to say you can't get Fortnite through the Google Play Store on your Android, but you can get it through another app store on your Android.
Yes.
So it is a more open ecosystem. Funnily enough, I was reading an article, Aaron, and that's actually what caused Google to lose their lawsuit with Epic, is because Epic was saying basically, oh, well, Fortnite can be on all these other platforms, but you're kicking us off of the Google Play Store because of this like payment dispute. And then they found that to be competitive, basically.
Yeah, which I think it was. Yeah. No, I was gonna say the Google the Android openness thing has always been one of the big draws for me to Android. It's the reason that I have not had an iPhone since I had an iPhone 5 in high school. Yeah, because even up until very recently, that was exemplified in like emulators and other things like that. Those didn't used to be allowed on the App Store at all. So if you wanted to play an emulator on your iPhone, you had to jailbreak it.
I think I saw something that emulators are being promoted on. Like there's
they're now up. They are now up on the App Store. That happened within the last
that's like very
2
recent.
months.
Yeah, that's a very recent development. Attender is the other app that is going against Apple and supporting Epic. That was the other one. I had to Control F for that. I also think it's interesting. Gabe Newell, similarly to some of the things that Tim Sweeney has been saying, Gabe Newell over at Valve, or more specifically Steam, has opposed a lot of Apple's control over the sale of apps on iOS. He takes issue with a lot of that. Which, I think is obviously very interesting, given Tim Sweeney and Gabe having two of the biggest competing platforms on PC, at least. But yeah, no, it's a very sticky situation. I'm not a fan of how Apple conducts business largely. I think the most interesting thing that's going to come out of this is basically the implications for platforms on other devices. If Apple loses this lawsuit, does that mean that PlayStation and Xbox need to enable other storefronts on their devices? Where is the line in terms of what's okay with exclusivity and control on a platform? When it comes to payment fees, really it's platform fees. It's not payment fees. What is the implication of all this for all these other platforms that exist? Because at least from my perspective, I think Xbox in the way that they do business is generally a little bit more open.
Yeah. They're the
But
Android to Sony's Apple.
Yeah, Sony is not as open. And Sony also has a lot of what I consider to be anti-developer, anti-consumer practices, such as they actually will charge developers a fee for what they view to be lost sales if a game is cross-platform. And what I mean by that is there is a fee associated. So if you've got a game, let's say, we'll just say Fortnite, and you decide to buy microtransactions on a platform that isn't PlayStation, there is a fee associated with that. Yeah, they charge you in what they view to be lost sales. So, in my mind, that is very anti-consumer and pretty fucked up.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds just like the 27% fee, but we get hit.
Yeah. Well, no.
That sucks.
So you as the consumer doesn't get hit. It hits the studio. Well, it's a way to defer, or not defer. It's a way to prevent people from wanting to make multi-platform games.
That sucks.
Yeah.
That sucks.
That's why you often don't see, like, Xbox has embraced it, largely, but Sony has been a stickler about it. And so I think this has huge implications for Sony and Microsoft, is my TLDR.
I will say, to echo that, no, I think you're 100% right. I think it will have implications for Sony and Microsoft, and I think to some degree, in a much younger way, weirdly enough, the pattern here is fairly similar, right? Where you've got Xbox doing kind of the Android thing, partially because they need to compete with this established closed product, right? So the PS4 generation absolutely decimated Microsoft's gaming division. The Xbox experience during the PS4 era was bad, and it seems very much like in terms of sales, Xbox is struggling now to compete with the PS5, right? So if their hardware itself is not drawing the same sort of brand loyalty that Sony's is, much in the same way that there may not be a diehard for a Motorola Moto G stylus, the same way there would be for an iPhone, they're going about it in a different way. They're opening up the platform. They're saying, well, you come to us not for the shiniest box, but for the best overall, most you-focused experience. You want to play Xbox games on your PC or your Switch or your PlayStation? We're great with that. Love us, not necessarily just the box, whereas Sony is taking its kind of market dominance and saying, stick to your guns, hold on tighter, grab as much money as possible, which is a very Apple move. So yeah, I think not just in terms of the legitimate precedent-setting implications of this case. There's also kind of a narrative through line between the two examples.
Well, I think you're 100% correct, because Phil Spencer for a while has been, really pushing this image of prosumer, as I'm going to keep calling it, pro-consumerism, regardless of whether it's true, because obviously, they got Bethesda, and then there were these exclusives that weren't coming to Sony, and then, there's all this stuff around that. And so is he a little two-faced around that? It looks like probably. But the image that Microsoft is trying to cultivate regardless is very much like the Android image of like, we want to be this more open platform. We don't want console exclusives. We think console exclusives are shitty and bad for everyone, all that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
And then on the Sony side, I think it's almost like a one-to-one comparison in a lot of ways, because, for better or worse, I've never had an Android phone, but I think generally speaking, if you're thinking like quality, you do think less of Android. I think Apple, because of this walled garden that they have, because of the way that they do marketing, I think that's kind of viewed as like this luxury status product, right?
Well, it's a lifestyle product.
Yeah, exactly. I think PlayStation markets their game consoles and games in a similar way. We're the, AAA
prestige
narrative, like gorgeous high fidelity game, studio, we have all these great games. We have this great console, all this stuff, right? That's not how Xbox is perceived right now, regardless of the fact that, Forza looks amazing every time it comes out, regardless of the fact that Xbox has some incredibly talented studios. That's just not how it gets perceived.
No, you still don't necessarily think of a Bethesda game as a Microsoft game or an Xbox game. The association isn't there. You still think of it as a Bethesda game. The new Arcane game comes out. You're not necessarily thinking like, oh, sick, new big Microsoft game. You're kind of thinking, oh, cool, oh, dag, sweet new Arcane game. Whereas if you think Naughty Dog, you're like, big Sony tentpole. Santa Monica, big Sony tentpole. Sucker Punch, big Sony tentpole.
I like that you didn't ignore, but you
Spider-Man.
didn't hear my comment about Bethesda in there.
I did not hear it.
You were talking about it, what it wasn't, right? And I was like, or a good game.
That's true. That is a fair addendum. I'm sorry I spoke over that.
No, I was expecting a chuckle, and you kept going. I was like, damn, that boy just plowed right through.
No, a post chuckle for sure. No, but I think that's a really solid point. And it kind of leads me to one of my other takeaways, which is that the reason that the DOJ is going after Apple to try and enact these big sweeping changes that could trickle down to, our PlayStations and our TVs, a billion different things. One of the reasons, or the big reason that they are targeting Apple instead of Google is for the same reason that we said Apple was the right company to try and make the Vision Pro viable to consumers at large. And it's the same reason, it's because they're Apple. They have that lifestyle brand mentality to them. They're not always just selling you on the best technology. They're selling you on the image of the best technology. They're selling you on this, expensive prestige promise. And it works. It's part of everyone's lives. The iPhone was and is a game changer, and it's huge, and Apple is eponymous with that sort of quality to a lot of people. So it makes sense that they would be the ones to take this unproven technology like the Vision Pro and bring it into the limelight. It also makes sense that if you're going to try and take somebody down, that's where you start. If you can take the head, the rest of them will fall in line. But you want to focus on Apple because that's the most marketable case. And if it goes through, it's the one with the most long-reaching tendrils of impact.
Yeah. Yeah. And also I think it's just important to mention again, like the biggest segment of the gaming space in terms of market segments is mobile. So there is a massive amount of money to be had here in the mobile gaming space. And if you can give more of that money back to developers, I think that's great.
Great.
Whether that's through, lower, more competitive platform fees or allowing developers to use their own payment processing, options. I don't think we'll see a world where like everyone suddenly jumps off Apple in the App Store, because I think there's a lot of value that the platform probably provides to people. But the reality is that some large like publishers, they don't necessarily need to be on the App Store when it comes to payment, because they can make their own payment, processing applications, websites, whatever. They also can pay for their own marketing. They may not need that discoverability and all of that. And so what I think might happen as a result of some of these things, at least the case against Epic in the EU, is that there's going to be a lot of shakeup in places that aren't the US, because in the US, it seems like Apple is kind of just going to keep, towing the status quo, because they're not being pushed in the same way as like in Europe with the Digital Market Act. But I think that we'll definitely see some larger developers either try to, put their games on platforms that aren't the App Store if it gives you a higher cut of profit. Or, maybe they'll try to find a way outside of any of these app stores to get your game onto your phone. There's some games like Star Citizen. I don't know why that pops into my head, but you just download their game from a website. You don't go through Steam or Epic Games Store, so there presumably could be ways where maybe you just download applications from websites and you circumvent an app store entirely, right?
I mean, that's how it used to be before we had the App Store.
Yep.
If you think about it, the App Store is a concept that came about comfortably within our lives. Before that, it was just, a series of disconnected storefronts. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think there's a way to combine the efficiency of, a consolidated storefront with the sort of equity of having your own sort of direct to pay me for the product thing. I don't know. I find it fascinating because you are talking about the EU, and in a lot of ways, this DOJ case is actually following in the footsteps of action that's already been taken in the EU. So now that the US has done it, there's some speculation that other countries may follow suit, if you'll pardon the pun, in going after Apple. It is worth mentioning, just on a little brief tiny side tangent so I don't accidentally make myself a liar, when I said that the fact that the suit was filed in New Jersey would become relevant. There's a tiny little fun fact there that feeds into how badly it seems that the DOJ actually wants this case to land. That the district court where the case will be heard, because it was filed in New Jersey, recently won a similar antitrust case against a company that made false teeth. So they're hoping that they may be able to leverage some of that precedent in that court specifically. And also, that's the district where Samsung is headquartered, which may end up providing some, additional lobbying efficacy. Yeah, so all of that aside, they do seem to be pretty invested in actually seeing that this case goes the whole way, and we actually do get to see any of these implications kind of play out in real time. But the other side of that coin is, of course, them looping in the public in as much as they can, which I think is evident in the fact that, by all accounts, the 88-page lawsuit itself is actually very digestible. It's written out in such a way as to be readable by the public, not just lawyers. There is an obvious play for public favor here that can't really be ignored in the bigger picture of how badly the DOJ is trying to get Apple to come down a peg and break up some of these big tech companies. So I guess the question that I have for you, outside of we'll see it happening in other countries and we'll see it happening here for a couple of years, do you think this case is built well at all? Do you think that there's a chance that we will actually see these changes come to pass?
I mean, I think that we stand a better chance with the Epic versus Apple situation, mostly because I even struggle with, the time period that we've grown up in. I do feel like we're very used to the walled garden approach to some degree. And I think that for me, I view it as kind of a natural thing to kind of want. Like, I've invested all of this time and energy into making this hardware and this software. Of course, I want to promote the software and hardware that my company is making over the hardware and software that another company is making. Like, in my brain, that makes sense to me. I also understand why, that's anti-competitive, because if someone has a really, really solid app that's better than any of the apps that I have, and it does all the things that my app has, but I refuse to put it on my phone because I don't want it to compete with me. Like, I understand the issue there. So I think that, to your point about the 88 pages being really digestible, I think the biggest thing the biggest hurdle that's going to need to be overcome, so to speak, is really articulating how this is a problem and, why we as consumers should care. Because I think Apple has a lot of public favor. I think there's a lot of Apple heads, for lack of a better way of putting it, right? Like, there are a lot of people that really love Apple as a brand. They identify with the brand. It's got a strong following.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that's going to be the hardest thing because, I mean, I don't know. That's not necessarily true, maybe. But I think if there was more public support for breaking up Apple, I could only see that as helping the DOJ case. And
right.
I definitely do think that the DOJ case has a ton of implications for other platforms, and I'm not sure how much other platforms are really going to want to have to face that, implications of Apple losing. Like I said, Sony. What does that mean for Sony? What does that mean for Xbox? What does that mean for? I have less of an issue with Steam and the Epic Games Store because it's on your PC. It's not really locked down in the same way. But
yeah.
I
was gonna say, I feel like those are a little bit more straightforward in their literal application, in that those are storefronts where you go to buy games. If someone wants to list their game on that storefront, they comply with your terms of service and they pay you the platform fee and whatever the fuck. I think where that is a little bit different from what the problem with Apple is that the App Store is much more than just games. The iPhone, sort of ecosystem is obviously its whole own beast. So I can see where there's a bit of a dissonance between comparing the storefronts like Steam and something like even something like a PlayStation, because again, like you said, it's not actually tied to a specific piece of hardware. It would be very different if maybe the Steam Deck came out and you weren't able to load any non-Steam software.
Yeah, I mean, I think of the examples I listed, I think the Epic Games Store and Steam should be fine because you have options, more options on PC than anywhere else. I think more of where, like...
Nintendo,
yeah. Nintendo, Xbox, PlayStation. I just don't know what the implications of Apple losing are for those situations. And I can see people on Twitter making a big fuss in defense of like PlayStation, saying, well, PlayStation should be able to charge all this because they're the ones funding the games and they're daddy, like whatever. Or for Xbox or for Nintendo. Like, I think it's going to be a very interesting case. I look forward to seeing what happens. I think ultimately Apple losing is the best move for consumers. In terms of, are they going to put up a good case? I think you saying that the 88 pages are digestible is a really positive sign. As we've seen, though, our government isn't always the best at talking about technical issues, as was represented when when Congress, interrogated Mark Zuckerberg, or has ever interrogated Mark Zuckerberg or any social media personality ever. That's where the real concern is I just don't know if our government is good at talking about technology and understanding where the issues are. Although I will say that the older gentleman that I watched talk about the DOJ case submission did bring up some good points, and I do think he was very articulate about those points. And like I said, he was an older gentleman, and I thought he did a good job. So it's very possible that they've got good people on the case and that they do actually understand the technical issues that they're running up against.
Yeah. I suppose it's always a gamble when you have a governing body made of like octogenarians. It's always going to be a challenge there. Yeah, there's definitely a couple of hurdles that really the DOJ faces predominantly in terms of making this case as appealing as possible to the people who actually decide it. Namely, Apple is kind of undercutting some of the major complaints by just doing what they could have been doing anyway and making them null and void. So there's some people who are speculating, like, different analysts speculating that the overall adherence to like sort of outdated issues or issues that could become outdated before the case itself is actually resolved may end up weakening the case. Failure to specifically mention extant products like WeChat anywhere in the case is being pointed at as kind of a failure for presenting the case clearly. So, I mean, there's 1,000 different ways that could go. It seems like the Apple and Epic, I don't know, I think ultimately if that continues going, if Epic continues picking fights with Apple about that one, I actually have a sneaking suspicion that we will see the impacts of that particular fight way before we see this. Because this case could go either way. Whereas if Epic is going to keep poking the bear that is Apple, eventually something's going to come of that, and the storefront rules alone will change, and the overall ecosystem will stay similar. But yeah, I think I agree with you that ultimately taking down or at least shortening the walls of Apple's walled garden by and large is a pro-consumer move. But I do think we're going to see some funky Wild West shit if it happens.
I mean, I find some of the Apple stuff to be like mildly offensive in the sense of like, there is always going to need to be some like consumer responsibility when it comes to what you download on your phone.
Oh yeah.
And how you interact with software. And I think it's kind of overly patronizing for Apple to think that they have to always have control over all of that and that people aren't capable of doing any of that. Like, you should know. I mean, it's on PC. Maybe it's just because I do so much of my gaming and work on PC that I just understand that the internet is a bit of the Wild West, and you should probably research something before you download something from a website that you don't necessarily know whether it's safe or not. Like,
right.
You have to put more effort in, yes. But on PC, there's platforms I fully trust to not download, like, viruses onto my computer, and I use those too. So I think you can have a mix of the two things. And just because Apple loses their wall around the walled garden, some people may choose to just entirely exist on the App Store because they like that safety. They like that Apple quality. They like the different TOS terms that they push on developers, right? So
Yeah.
it's to me, it's like, give people the choice. If people want to make bad decisions on their iPhone, like whatever, like it's their fault
Yeah.
at that point. It's like if you jailbreak something and you fuck up your device, like
Yeah,
you're the
you
one
did
that did that.
Yeah, it's not like there's jailbreak warranties offered by Apple. No, I mean, I'm a living example of how not to fall into the walled garden situation, because I got out of the iPhone when I was in high school, and I have effectively spent 15 years building the most fragmented tech ecosystem I could, because I have a MacBook and a Windows tablet and a Google phone and an Alexa, and none of it's tied into one ecosystem. So I don't really have the benefit of having everything attached to Siri or everything attached to Alexa or everything attached to my Google Assistant. But I can still function in today's modern world. So having the flexibility to pick and choose and do what you want has worked out fine for me. I just haven't been able to take advantage of any of the good Apple features because I haven't bought all the other devices. I just get the hardware. The hardware does what the hardware does, and I don't get any of the ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
I'm personally okay with that, but for some people, that's all their shit. That's their photos. That's how they, monitor what their kids are watching. If they lose their iCloud password, it's basically like losing their social security number, except more immediately inconvenient. So yeah, it's a different sort of situation.
Yep. No, it definitely is an interesting situation, and I think that also the implications of this. I just wonder, and this will probably be my closing remark, but in business, a lot of the time, there's an interest to make your software integrate better with your software than with a competitor's software, even if that's only because, you understand your software better and it's easier for you to get those integrations running more quickly. I'm excluding the fact that in reality, that also makes your product more sticky. It makes it harder for people to leave, all these other things, right? I just wonder with some of these court cases, whether that's going to become something that gets scrutinized, because ultimately that is anti-consumer. If you've got one product that's really good and it's truly best in class, but your other side products that integrate with it are not as good as your competition's, but your competition doesn't integrate with your great product as much as your, side products that are kind of lackluster.
Yeah.
That's technically anti-consumer and anti-competitive. And that's kind of what's being attacked by the DOJ, in my opinion, in their lawsuit, is this idea of, Apple limiting integrations with certain devices. With like the smartwatch. So I'm just curious how that can get, extrapolated on moving forward, and what implications that has, because a ton of companies do that. A massive amount of companies do that. I'm not prescribing a moral judgment there, but I am just saying that's very common.
Well, I mean, at what point does it become anti-consumer to have a TV remote not be universal? You know what I mean? At a certain point, we get into a slippery slope argument. Because I went to the extreme there,
Yeah.
But,
well, I'm just curious, like, when it, like, to what degree does some of these things, like, really matter?
Right.
And I'm not defending corporations when I say that. Like, I'm not saying, like, I would even be hesitant to say the slippery slope argument on my side, because I think, like, if everything was truly, like, interchangeable, I again think that that's a good consumer move. I just realized that from a software development, a hardware development perspective, it could be really hard to support everything equally.
for sure.
Yeah, that's kind of the degree to which I wonder how much all of this gets extrapolated on. But I guess we'll see the results.
Yeah, probably not for a good long while, but yeah, it's coming. This could be one of the biggest cases in like tech history if it pans out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
definitely.
straight up, and the implications, obviously, just don't stop at smartphones. That changes gaming, that changes the way you interact with your products, their storefronts, their operating systems. Yeah, it could be a huge game changer.
Yeah, I think that this case, it would be a mistake, in my opinion, to view either of these cases as an attack on mobile app stores. I think that really, especially the DOJ case, is an attack on what it means to be a platform and the power that a platform holds. I think a lot of that does matter if your hardware that your platform's deployed on, if it only supports your platform. I think that that's much more under scrutiny than if your device supports multiple platforms. But I think that's really what we're seeing, because to your earlier point, and this is actually my last thing, I promise this time, I think the idea of a platform is still pretty new, relatively speaking. I don't think it's something that's been around. I mean, at this point, I don't know when the App Store came out, but like,
the iPhone came out in what? 07?
Something like that. So we're talking about something that's maybe been around like 20 years, which is really young, in my opinion, when it comes to tech. So I think we still don't understand a lot of the ramifications and what's fair and what's not fair when it comes to platforms. So I think that's kind of what's being explored right now.
Yeah. No, I don't think I could have said it better myself, so I don't think I'll try. And that's the end of the episode. No. But no, I really do agree. I think this is one of the most oddly conceptual lawsuits maybe I've ever seen. But yeah, it'll be fascinating to see where it goes and how this further defines and changes the definition of platform.
Time will tell.
Time will tell. But since we're talking about platforms, I can name off a good couple ones where you can listen to Beach Girl, the provider of our fine intro and outro music. Would it be okay if I did that?
Oh, what are some platforms for Beach Girl? The fine
Beach Girl.
Person that's
Yes, platforms for Beach Girl include, but are not limited to, Spoofy, Erturb, Band Cramps, Sound Growls. That's nothing. Bandcamp, Spotify, SoundCloud, YouTube, anywhere fine digital music can be found, you can find the fine digital music of Beach Girl. All jests and japes aside, it actually is phenomenal music. Check them out wherever you can and share it around. It's a good time and we'd appreciate it. Thank you and good night.
And if you want some beautiful, eye-catching artwork, make sure to check out eDougie Art. That's eDougie Art on both Instagram and Etsy. eDougie Art was the wonderful friend of ours that helped us come out with our general color design and our album art and our logo and all that stuff that I say every single time. So make sure to check out eDougie Art. We really appreciate the work that she did for us. And show some love.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. You can actually support them directly on various platforms. The service fees of which I am not 100% sure of. But, at risk of rambling, I shall bid you goodbye! Adieu. At least we still have the Borderlands movie to look forward to.